Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amanda Forrester, and I am with the Roanoke Regional Small Business Development Center. We have Heather on board with us today. Hey, Heather. She's going to be helping us in the back end manage the workshop today. And y'all, we've invited Eric Byrd from our Loudon SBDC office, which is part of George Mason University. Hey, Eric.
Hey.
A good friend of mine, and we invited him today to talk about this 5-step model that he has when we're thinking about or are selling in such a noisy world that we live in today, where we're competing for our customers' attention. And so I can't wait to hear more from Eric here in just a little bit. We're going to talk about prioritizing sales activities, identifying opportunities, building trust with customers, and how that works with networking or making sales calls. I don't mean like on the phone, but when you're trying to make a sale with someone. And if you're like me, I don't like networking events. I actually despise them, and I do have to go to them a lot. Cards are exchanged, you follow them on LinkedIn or get connected on LinkedIn. You have great conversations, your hopes are high, and then there's crickets. And I don't know if you all have experienced that, but I certainly have and do. And so I can't wait to hear more from Eric on some of that. Plus, if you're like me, and I know you are as a small business, you could go to something every night. There's stuff all the time going on that you could be at. And so how do you prioritize that and know which one you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck on? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But Eric, first, will you tell us a little bit about your sales and coaching background?
Sure, happy to. First off, thanks for inviting me in. This is fun. I enjoy coming and talking about this. I have what a friend of mine calls a portfolio career, which means I've done a whole bunch of different things. I think I'm on career number 6 or something like that. And I like the way that sounds because it sounds like I did it on purpose. But the reality is I just went from opportunity to opportunity. Before I was coaching, I was in sales full-time for about 25 years in the kind of the technology world, mostly video technology. So this video conferencing stuff is fairly familiar to me because I helped people deploy it for many, many years prior to the pandemic and coming on board with the SBDC. So when I started coaching, I actually started training. My degree is in communication. So I was bringing back the communication training that I had and melding it with my sales experience and helping people understand technology. And I also started working with some small businesses that I got connected with through my networking. So I have always had a very customer-centric, sales, communication-focused and oriented perspective on business and coaching. And I may have a couple of stories about like building my network and using my network to do things as we kind of go through this. In 2012, I guess it was, I actually developed a networking training program that I launched online, which is where I'm going to pull some of this material we're going to talk about today. And as it turns out, a lot of it applies to selling because that's what a lot of people use networking for, as prospecting for sales conversations. I joined the SBDC as a full-time coach in 2015. Up here in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia. And so have basically done that full time for the last 7 years. I still can't believe it's been 7 years, but for the last 7 years, working with, hundreds and hundreds of companies, just like you all do down there in the Roanoke area, on all kinds of different things for all different kinds and sizes of small business. Sort of my expertise, I'm kind of the generalist up here. But one of the areas of focus that I work a lot with people is sort of what I call pre-marketing, which is I'm not a marketing expert. I'm the sales more is my expertise. But it's all about client acquisition and how to get the messaging out and how to identify who your target markets are and how to get out in front of those people because they're the ones most likely to buy from you. So value proposition and things like that. So those tend to be my particular focus areas when I'm coaching. And then I have had, some on the side projects and coached some private folks specifically on networking and sales and things like that over the years. So
Well, we're
in
really
a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
You go. And I know you and I could talk all day, but we just are pleased to have your expertise with us. Before we start talking about some of these things, I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping for everyone that's here on with us today. And I think we have a slide for that, Heather. All right. So we are going to end promptly at 3:00. There's going to be an opportunity for some questions at the end, but you also don't have to hold them. If you will, keep your microphones muted so that we don't get any background noise. Just mute your microphone. And if you have a question as we go, pop it in the chat so that we can get to that. And then also at the end, if you want to unmute and ask, you're welcome to do that as well. But make sure to get that stuff in chat too while we talk. We want to get to any specific questions that you have. It can be very specific to your business. We're going to have a little bit of time at the end to go through that. We are recording this workshop for internal purposes. This isn't something that we send out after the workshop to our attendees or those who weren't here. It's really just an internal tool for us. So just know that it is being recorded. You can also use closed captioning in this. It is enabled, and you should see it and you can cut it off if you'd like, or you can turn it on if for some reason it's turned off for you. Take notes today. We don't have a bunch of slides. This is really going to be a conversation, and we want you to grab what's important for you and useful for you. And so grab something to take some notes with. And then, of course, if there's more detail you want to get into that we don't have time to do today, we encourage you to make an appointment with us or with an advisor, get set up with an advisor so that we can talk through this and your specific business. And at the end of the workshop, we will share the contact information so that you know where to go to do that. But for now, I want to just roll on and get into this. I want to jump into this stuff, Eric. And when you and I were talking right before this, we know we've got the 5 steps we want to go through, but we're going to back up just a little bit and talk about what you call the connection principle. And I think this is so important. I know I'm excited to learn about this. So what is the connection principle? And what does it have to do with what we're talking about?
Yeah. So back when I was in sales, which I did a lot of, and I was primarily business to business sales and complex sales. So generally speaking, there's 2 types of selling. There's simple sales and there's complex sales. The general definition is a simple sale is 1 or 2 decision makers. So if you're talking to somebody and they're going to buy it and then use it, or it's a couple of people, 2 owners of a business, or a couple, or whatever, then you just have to worry about helping them make the decision. In a complex sale, there are multiple people involved in the process of making the decision ultimately. Even if there's one person who gets to say yes when everybody else says no, that never happens. So you have to get other people in that organization on board with the yes, or the person who's in charge of yes probably won't say yes, right? So that's the selling I did, which was larger ticket items, much more complex integrated systems, that kind of stuff. So what I noticed as I was doing that was that while I was managing a process of sales and all these different people, that what it really came down to was it was all a bunch of people. And all of these people had different concerns and different thoughts and different questions that I had to manage through the process. Now, it turns out that's very much the same as a simple sale. You have one person who's making the decision. They have questions, they have concerns, they have an outcome they're trying to achieve. So the process of selling is basically just that communication, that having that conversation. It's a specialized form of communication. What I also noticed was I did a lot of networking as well, and that was part of my selling process. And what I saw was there were a lot of parallels, right? So each individual person in the sale had to be communicated with, and there was a process that I kept seeing over and over and over. And you mentioned earlier, and we'll come back to it, this idea of the way most people a lot of people's experience networking is also people's experience when they sell. They meet somebody, they interact, and then they try to follow up. We'll come back to that concept a lot, right? And then you get crickets, right? Or what I call the abyss. Somehow that conversation falls into the abyss and, never to be heard from again or whatever. So what I started to do was to notice that the follow-up seemed to be where things ran off the rails. Whether that was a one-person sale or a multi-person sale, or I was just getting to know somebody from network, the same process was happening. So what I started to do is think about, well, what's going on and what's this process, what's happening? How do we do this differently? And so I came up with this idea to reverse engineer the the process or the conversation, the big conversation that's going on. And that's what I call it the networking principle or the connection principle, right? So the way, and actually I can share that slide now if we're up to that point. Does that work? Heather,
Sure,
am I allowed to share? Okay.
Yeah,
Just
you're
want
good.
to, because I take down your slide when I put up my slide. So for those of you that can see the slides, basically it's 4 steps. I know some of you are on the phone, so you probably can't see this, but there's 4 steps to this principle. And what I did is I thought, okay, well, what do you end up with? What's your goal of ending up with this person? And what you want to end up with is you want to end up with some kind of a relationship. So whether that's they're your customer in a selling situation, it might be that they're your customer. But in a networking situation, it may not be that they're your customer. You may want them to be a referral source, or you may want them to be a vendor, or you may want them to be a contact, long-term contact of some kind. So what we're shooting for is a relationship. Well, how do relationships form? Who do you actually end up in developing a relationship with? Well, it's people that you have some kind of solid connection with, right? So great. So you get connected with people, you get to know each other, and the relationship forms. Okay, well, how do you get connected? So how's the connection come about? And what I realized was you find connections in conversations. So whether you're intentionally trying to sell or whether you're just meeting people and kind of finding out who's who and who might be useful to you and you might be useful to, you're really doing that through different kinds of conversations. And so then I thought, well, what makes a conversation a conversation? Because there's a whole lot of that. We'll talk about that definitely when we talk about the 5 steps, right? There's a whole lot of people talking at people, right? And not necessarily a lot of two-way conversations. So I started to think about that. We'll go into that a little bit later. But what I realized was what sparks an actual, genuine, meaningful conversation is interest. I'm interested in what you're saying, and you're interested in what I'm saying. Now, it can start on either side of that. You're talking to somebody and you say something and they go, hey, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Now we're in a conversation. Or it might be that you ask them a question and they say something and you say, hey, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Now, here's the thing about interest. It has to be genuine. If you are trying to fake interest, people know.
Yeah, when I think about that, Eric, I always think about staying curious, right? Like if you're
Yes,
curious, then that's authentic and genuine.
exactly. Well, and the other element to this is that something has to be interesting to the other person.
Yeah.
So there's 2 parts to this. There's you need to stay engaged. And by the way, there's skills involved in that, right? Good listening skills, curiosity skills, communication skills. We'll talk about some of those in a little bit. But that's your side. That's the side you have control over. The other side is that they have to be interested in what you're saying or the conversation dies on the vine. Now, this is whether I'm just trying to get to know you or whether I'm trying to show you that I have something I want you to buy. Same thing applies. If they're not interested, then they're not going to continue the conversation. You're not going to get a connection and you won't end up in a relationship. So that was sort of like, oh, this is like a little mini revelation for me. That's what's happening. So I turned that into what we'll talk about next, which is the 5 steps in the overall process. But the key here is that if you want to get to the relationship, you have to go through these steps. Now, you don't always go through these steps like you one at a time in the same conversation. So I like to say that especially networking, and this applies for prospecting or selling, is about meeting and re-meeting. So
Oh,
you
that's a
may
good point.
not find a connection or get into a really meaningful conversation with somebody the very first time you meet them. Right?
That's really important for us to like let sink in, because we always, if we're going to spend the time and effort, we want that connection the first time. But you're
That's
so
right.
right. Many times it's that second or third conversation.
And you don't ever know which conversation it's going to be, which is why I started to realize you don't make connections, you discover them.
Oh, that's good. That's like a tweetable. You
Right?
don't make,
You find a connection, you
discover.
don't
Yeah.
create one from nothing. You can't create a connection from nothing. So, and this is why the genuine interest is so important. Right? And so clear communication, all these things that make that possible. Rapport building, trust building, all of these things, right? And more, as we were talking about a little earlier, people are buying differently because people are burned out on being sold to.
Yeah.
So trust is critical. Trust has always been critical, but it's even more important now that people genuinely trust you and where you're coming from and what you're saying. And so showing genuine interest is your first trust point. In that conversation, whatever it is, they need to sense and understand that you are being open and genuine in the conversation. And if you're actually interested in them, they'll know it. If you're not, they will also know it. So, I like to say that human beings, our brains are miraculous things, and they are really good BS detectors. Human beings are remarkable at detecting when something isn't quite right. It's very true. Like
Yeah.
lots and lots of neuroscience and all the stuff around exactly that, right? So this became sort of the center of, oh, here's what's happening. Now, here's something that's important, especially if you're looking at this B2B selling. If your B2B is a simple sale, you're talking to the owner of the company, the owner or the manager in charge of that, and they actually have buying authority and there's no other complexity to it. Well, then you're going to go through this process with that person. If there's more than one person involved in a B2B sale, which sometimes there are, then each person goes through this process with you.
And Eric, that when you have a sale that involves more, you're not going direct to the buyer. You have to go through several. What did you call that? Was it a complex sale?
Complex sale. Yeah. And
I'm
there are
having this.
systems, there are lots of systems out there. So the one I learned was Miller Hyman. I think they are owned by Huthwaite now, but it's Miller Hyman. It's called Strategic Selling is the one that I learned forever ago. I could date myself. I learned it in the early 90s, right? But it's a way to manage all of those people and all of that information. And that's not the only one. There's a whole slew of systems that help you manage that, right? Which, by the way, is why a lot of people recommend you should have some kind of, customer relationship management database or process, something to be able to manage all of the different people involved. And this is one of the reasons why that's important, is because you're communicating and going through a process with each individual person that's involved in that selling decision by that company. Right? The fewer the people, the simpler it is, but you still go through all these processes, all these steps with everybody. If there's more people, you still go through these steps with people. And then part of it is you have to prioritize, who to spend a lot of time with and who's really important and who influences who and like all that stuff. We're not getting into that today. That's another whole like week-long But this is what I realized was at the root of it, especially when I was out trying to make new relationships when I was networking, which is why it showed up in my networking program. Because people were getting frustrated that the conversations, as you mentioned earlier, didn't seem to be going anywhere. And so this really opened up a whole new way to think about it. And that led me to creating this five-step concept of what the process looks like.
I would imagine too, as we think about prioritization, because I know that's important to our small businesses, if they only have a certain amount of time, I think quickly we could say that you prioritize the people that you have the most connection or genuine interest in.
That's exactly right.
And spend more time and effort on those folks, because it's gonna be an easier sell. And it's genuine and authentic. So prioritizing those, I think, above the others could be an important step there.
Absolutely. And we'll see that when we get to the 5 steps. That's sort of the lesson that we learn when you kind of put it into a process, a step-by-step process.
Let's roll into it. Let's talk about those 5 steps.
Okay, well, let's go. Let me slide down here. Okay, so here's the 5-step process. I call it the 5-step stages to relationship, basically. And this is for use when you're selling or when you're networking, right? Especially because most of the people who own their small business, when you are networking with some kind of a purpose in mind. Oftentimes that purpose is prospecting. Now, the nice thing about networking in a sales context is it has a lot of benefits and it has some negatives, right? The negatives are that it takes a lot of one-on-one time. It's very time consuming and it really isn't scalable. It requires you in real time, usually interacting with one person at a time. So as far as a marketing funnel, networking is not great if you need to get mass response to something, right? That's more of a marketing function where you need to get a message out and pull leads in for a bunch of people and then filter the leads, right? This is if I've identified people I want to talk to, and then I'm going to then go through this process of talking. And so really briefly, the 5 steps are: you prepare yourself to do it, you make contact with people, you find the connections, that's the critical piece, you follow up, and then once you've in a relationship, you maintain it, right? And so what I found was step 3 and step 5 is where people fell down a lot. So kind of walking through what that looks like. At step 1, what you're doing is you're preparing yourself and whatever you need to be able to do the rest of the steps well. This is the one that most people I found skip. They don't think about being intentional, and this is true sometimes for selling as well as for networking. They just go out and start talking to people. Now, there may be some preparation. Oftentimes people will create some kind of an elevator speech. They'll get some business cards and they might have some brochures, and that's all fine. Those are good things to do. Those are not bad things to do. But thinking through, well, why am I doing this particular activity? Why am I going to that particular event? What is this group? What is the tie-in with this particular group? Now, what I say is it doesn't matter what it is, but you want to know what it is. So if you're going to the local chamber breakfast, you need to know why you're going to the local chamber breakfast. And there's not just one good reason to do that, right? So you mentioned prioritizing your activities and your time. Time is the one thing you can't get any more of, right? So thinking through what you're trying to do, figuring out what systems like a CRM or, you have an email list, what are you going to do with these people once you're engaged in conversation with them? And then what skills do you need to prepare and hone so that you are effective going through the process? Now, if you're networking, that's more communication, right? Skills, follow up, and have some systems in place and know how to use them. If you are selling, that might be slightly different skills, but again, still conversation-based skills. We're talking about, lots of questions, lots of active listening, all those kinds of things, right? So identifying and making sure that you are ready to go and start having these conversations. So once you do that, then basically it's go out and Go out and meet people. Now, whether that's physically go out to that meeting and meet people, or whether that's run some kind of a marketing process or outreach process that pulls people in that you then have a conversation with, depends on what you're doing, right? So this is the step in selling and networking when you are interacting with somebody maybe the first time. But again, remember, it's meeting and re-meeting. That's where this becomes important. So what I find is, especially in networking, people get uber fixated on the introduction. That elevator speech becomes everything, and not as a criticism, because you need one, or actually I believe you need more than one. You need a bunch of ways to flexibly introduce yourself for different situations. Like my kind of silly joke on that is, if you're at your kid's soccer game and somebody walks up and says, "What do you do?" and you drop your corporate elevator speech on them, all the parents at the game are going to kind of move away from you just a little bit. Just saying, I've seen it happen. So you want to have some ways to be able to tell people what you do that's contextually appropriate, that's situationally, like, I'm in this situation, here's how I might tell somebody what I do. And then there's conversation skills, right? You're looking for body language. You want to have some confidence around it. So it's, how do you start a conversation? And then how do you pick up a conversation from the last time you may have seen this person? So anybody that, and I do a lot of Chamber of Commerce stuff up here, right? So I see the same people over and over and over and over again, which is fantastic. It's also easy to not pick up the conversation where you left off and either A, have the same conversation you had last time all over again, usually involving food, weather, or, something else that never changes. Traffic. Up here, traffic's the big thing, right? So, or to try to push the conversation in a particular direction when it's not already flowing that way, right? So here's where we get lots of communication skills, right? So you make contact, you go out there, you do it. You're going to meet the same people over and over and over again. Now, the third step here is finding that connection, right? So this is the pivot point. When you're having a conversation, what you are doing is you are looking for different connections. The connection could be almost anything. It could be a personal connection. It could be a business connection. It could be an interest connection. It could be something else, right? But in the conversations, you are actively listening and participating. You are asking good questions, and you are also sharing, by the way, right, appropriately, because that's how you discover whether there's a connection with this person or not. There are lots of people who I know who teach just ask questions. The problem with that is a conversation is not one-sided. If you ask them and they tell you info, but you don't share anything back, then that's not actually a conversation. And the other person is not going to be as inclined to want to continue talking to you because it feels lopsided. Right.
Eric, can I ask something here? And
Please do.
Feedback. One of the things that I like to do that seems to work, but you tell me if this is a no-no. I like to go in and ask, particularly in, for all of those of you who are small business owners, I'm kind of in your boat with the SBDC, right? I'm the director, yes, and I have to do a lot of things that you all have to do with other businesses. And so when I have these conversations, I always like to ask, because I'm always thinking about how can they use my services, right? And how can we partner? I like to ask, what projects are you working on lately? And that typically will open up, they're excited to tell me what they're working on. And right, I can be listening for, are there anything I can jump in on there, anything that I can do or that we have in common within those projects? Does that work? Is that a...
Absolutely. So here's the key. The actual topic or the question is less important than how you have the conversation. So now we're back to the genuine interest. We love to talk about ourselves and what's important to us.
Yeah.
But we only really do that and meaningfully share with people we trust. So if you come up and say, what project are you doing, but I don't trust you, I don't know you. I'm going to share some things, but if I have heard from 5 other people at that event, Amanda's the bomb and her group is going to help you so much because everything they do is awesome. Then you come in and ask me, what are you doing? I'm much more likely to trust you enough to start sharing. And then if the conversation goes well, then I'm going to share more.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So yes, that can be a fantastic technique. The key is to be reading the other person.
Right.
And seeing how open they are to that interaction. If the person is not open to that interaction, don't push it because you'll drive them off. You'll close them down and you'll drive them off, right?
And Eric, we've got a question in chat that I want to go
Sure.
ahead and answer because it's relative to exactly what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And it's, how do you prepare and set the intent prior to a meeting or an event that you're going to?
So that's a great question. The answer to all questions is it depends. My clients hate that, but it's true, right? So the key is to think through, what is it that you want to achieve? And it may not be super specific. So if you want to say, I'm going to use the chamber breakfast just because everybody knows what a chamber breakfast is, generally speaking. So if I want to go to the chamber breakfast, you want to ask yourself, okay, what's the purpose? What am I hoping to get out of going to the chamber breakfast? Why am I going? Well, I'm hoping to meet some new people who I haven't met before. Okay, that's a good one outcome. I'm hoping to reconnect with people I've already had conversations with and see if the conversation can move forward, or maybe I'll find a connection with somebody. That's a good reason, right? So it may be simple like that. Now that's kind of a networking context. If you are going for a specific kind of a meeting, like I'm going to do an initial sales call kind of meeting with a business who I met somewhere and they said, sure, come on in and we can talk about what you do. Then you're going to want to think through, okay, well, what is likely to happen at this meeting, given what stage we're in this process? What do I think the other person is likely to feel is appropriate for that? And I like to do a very simple kind of call, sales call meeting, or actually any meeting. What's the best thing that can happen? What's the most likely thing to happen? And what's the least acceptable thing to happen?
Yeah.
Which is, if this happens, the meeting will have been worth, even if that isn't what the outcome I wanted. So in a sales call, sometimes you want them to say no, or you want them to make a decision. So that's an interesting concept in just selling, is oftentimes you're not trying to convince them to say yes, you're just trying to get them to make a decision. Because not everybody's going to say yes. And if they say no now, you're not going to keep pestering them and wasting a lot of your time and energy trying to get them to say yes when they're not going to say yes. Maybe is the most frustrating thing in sales ever. So if it's a sales call, you may be trying to get them to say yes or make a decision. You may not. You may just be fact-finding to see if they are ready or if they even can use what you have. Do they have a problem you can solve? So again, just be logical. It's not, none of this is brain surgery, right? So just think about where we are in our relationship. What is the most appropriate thing for what I'm going to try to do? And then be open to the fact that you're the only one half of the conversation. The other person has an opinion too. And so you want to think about it from the customer's perspective or the other person's perspective as well, and then kind of go with it. So hopefully that's an answer that helps.
I think if I'm not sure of the name of who asked that question, but if you want more or kind of want to carry on that conversation, just put it in chat and we'll there.
Love the dialogue. Love the dialogue.
Okay, so back to number 3 here.
So number 3 turns out, and I'll have a slide for this in a second. This turns out to be the linchpin. So here's what happens. After you find a connection, number 4, or the 4th step, is actually following up. Yeah. So following up is where you dive deep. That's where you get the sales call, you do the presentation, you tour their business, whatever it is. This is a lot of more trust building, a lot of communication, qualify. You're finding out more to see if there really is the possibility of a relationship there, right? So this is where your processes, especially your communication processes over time, because again, you're continuing to re-meet these people. Often at this point, it's an intentional meeting, not just I ran into you at an event. Because now it's like, oh, hey, Amanda, that was a really cool thing. Let's talk about that specifically. How about we have lunch and dive into it? Yes, let's do that. So, but remember, that's two-way. Now it's a two-way conversation. You cannot follow up one way, which starts to get into this idea of why everybody gets so frustrated when they get crickets back. They're trying to have a one-way conversation.
Yeah.
Basically, what it means is the other person is not interested in having a conversation and you're trying to force it.
Yeah.
Now, that makes sense. You see how you can help them and you want them to respond because you think you have value to them for them. The key here is to keep their perspective in mind. If they don't think there's a connection, then they're not going to be willing to follow up. Or worse, they're going to be willing to have a meeting, but it's not actually a follow-up meeting, even though you think it is. So we'll come back to that in a second. Now, once you've followed up, you either will form a relationship or you won't. And sometimes that takes a long time. Sometimes it happens fast. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes you try it out and it doesn't work out and they're not going to buy. They're not a referral partner. You're not going to hire them, like whatever it is. And that's fine. That's okay. Sometimes it does. Now you've mutually decided to be in a relationship. So this is the other thing. Once you both decide you're in some kind of a business relationship, you now have to maintain that relationship. So what I noticed over the years is looking at these 5 steps is what most people are taught to do. And this is taught when they're taught to network, but a lot of people are taught to sell this way. They go out, they don't really prepare, they go out and make contact, and then they jump to follow up and assume that they're in a relationship and they start relationship maintenance activities.
All right.
I just met you at the chamber event and you're sending me thank you cards and you put me on your mailing list and you wished my daughter a happy birthday on social media. And I don't even remember talking to you. I gave you my business card because that's the polite thing to do, but I don't know who you are. We're not in a relationship and you are attempting to treat me like I'm in a relationship with you.
Yeah. Hey, can I tell
So,
a quick story here?
yeah.
Because people also try to network with me all the time, right? They want, I don't have any money. And if I could just wear a sign that said that, then it's great. But they think we do. So they're always trying to sell. But even sometimes I was at an event in Richmond this past week and someone came up to me out of the, he owns a business in Richmond, love him. He's great. He's doing some really cool stuff, but immediately told me his name. And the first question out of his mouth was, can I get some time on your calendar to ideate?
Right.
And I was really taken back by that because I don't know you. I don't even know what you're doing.
That's right.
And you're already asking me for something that's really, those of you who know me, very valuable as my time. And I don't give it up easily. I was really taken back by that. And I did get an email afterwards and I honestly don't want to respond, Eric. That's horrible. I know I need to, but I felt like,
well, but so this is a great lesson for all of you on the call. This is what those other people on the other side are thinking, but they're too polite to say it. Right. Now, some people, depending on who you're talking to, are not too polite to tell you to bug off.
Yeah, I wasn't very polite. I felt like I should have been, but.
Well, so this is why it's useful to think about this as a process. Because here's what he ran into. It was a he?
Yes.
Okay. So what he ran into is he met you. There was no connection. And he jumped straight to trying to follow up.
Yeah.
Right. And probably will continue trying maintenance stuff. Like you please don't ever put anybody on your email list without their consent to put them on the email list. Forget all the rules and regulations. Like, but it was never a good idea to do that, even before it was against the rules, right? Because you are not, you're telling them that you don't respect them or their time or their opinion.
Yeah.
Now, they may get it. They may understand that instinctively. They may not quite understand that, but they're going to notice it. And because we're all sold to constantly, anybody that has, where's my phone? I don't even know where my phone is. Thank goodness. Speaking of, we're all bombarded with that stuff all the time now, right? So everybody is sensitive to that. So you be sensitive the other way. Don't go too far. Once you connect, then you can actually follow up and move to maintenance. So the key is those two go together. After you connect, you have a lot more leeway in what you can do with that communication. They have given you permission, because you're in a two-way conversation, to learn more, ask questions, have meetings, ask for lunch. And then once you are you've chosen to be in a relationship, you can't be in a relationship with somebody that didn't agree to it.
Yeah.
That's called stalking. Just saying. And it happens in business as well as personally, unfortunately. So that's the way to think about it when you are interacting with somebody else. Understand that at the point where you find the connection, it will be pretty obvious.
Yeah.
There's a click of some kind. I get that question all the time. Well, how do I know if it connects? Oh, you'll know. You'll know, because
And
it won't be, they'll ask you to have lunch.
what if you don't? There's a question in chat, like, how do you say I'm not interested right away? So on the opposite end of that, right?
Yes.
Like, how do we say, like, I know how I told this gentleman, but it
Yeah.
wasn't very polite and I should have handled it differently. So how do we say I'm not interested? Or if people are trying to sell, what can you expect back?
That
Like,
is
I
a
know.
great question. It depends. It depends on your personality, depends on what the situation is. I always opt for clear and direct, but polite and professional.
Mhm.
So I was actually at an event. It was a couple of years ago. I was at an event. I actually gave a presentation. I think it was on this. I gave a presentation on this, and then I had one of the members of the audience came up, and she insisted that she wanted to have a meeting with me because she was sure that we could do something together. And I said, okay, what do you see? And she says, well, I don't know, but I'm sure if we got together and had a meeting, we could find something. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I don't see the connection. And I think I might have even pointed to my slide. And I said, were you listening to what I just was teaching? I'm not seeing a connection here. I appreciate your enthusiasm. That's a great line, by the way, because it's genuine, right? So I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'm not seeing a connection. So I really don't have time for that right now. Now, here's the key. If you do not connect with somebody, you can keep in touch with them. So keep in touch and follow up are two totally different things. They're very different from an activity perspective. You can ask somebody who you do not, because we all ask for business cards and give business cards. What I actually do now is I will not give anybody my business card unless they ask for it. And even then, I will say sometimes, so what are you going to do with the information? Well, I'll reach out and I said, tell you what, why don't we just see each other at the next event? Do you come to this event often? Yes. It would be great to see you at that event. I'll see you at another breakfast, mixer, meeting, whatever it is. Because you have to protect your time as a business owner. And it's not always easy, right? And it can be uncomfortable. But there are some polite ways to say, I appreciate, your offer, but no, thank you. A phrase I actually use with some of my a little more exuberant friends is, that doesn't work for me. Like whenever they want me to do something I don't want to do. Actually, that doesn't work for me. I'm sorry, and that's it. They know now. That's it. So there's The key is to be honest. You don't have to be, overreactive. But it's okay to say, I'm sorry, this is a really busy time for me, and I'm just not seeing the connection right now. But I hope I see you in an event and we'll talk again. And if that changes, then at that point, maybe we can go further, but I'm not there right now. And by the way, don't ever say, if that changes in the future, without saying, we're not there right now. Because that is sort of giving them implicit, permission in their mind to continue pestering you. And also, don't be the person who incessantly pesters somebody when it's not crystal clear that they want you to engage.
Yeah. And so we've got about 6 minutes left, but I wanted to just share right here for you all on that receiving end. If you get a cold email asking you for, a sale, or they've got something you want, don't respond to them that you're not interested. Just don't respond, because
Yeah.
once you do respond, you've given them permission to continue to email you. It's the rule that Eric was talking about in the email world. So just like delete those, block those people, send them to junk, whatever, email settings you have. But don't fall for that stuff in email. And same for you. If you're selling someone and you are sending a cold mail and they email you back, that actually does give you permission to start emailing them. So I'm not going to say do that, but that's kind of the business acronym to do that in the email world.
And one thing to think about is, don't just send emails to send emails. And so a lot of this is about understanding the other person's perspective and their perception of what's their situation and what's going on for them, and their perception of you and how you fit into their world. Right? So this framework can help you figure out, because you can ask somebody, hey, it feels like there might be something here. What do you think? And if they go, yeah, I don't know, then don't push it. Right? Always err on the side of respect for them and their time. And here's why: because you're going to meet that person again. You're going to have a chance to re-meet them. And when you re-meet them, they will appreciate that you are respectful of their time. And then they'll be more comfortable, and you're building trust every time you do that. So it feels really weird. And there's a lot of people teach sales who go, no, grab every opportunity. And I'm like, yeah, you don't want to risk alienating somebody for no good reason. Right.
I can definitely tell with my example with the gentleman who approached me. Then afterwards, other people saw that and they came up and said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, he is after everybody. And you don't want that reputation.
Yeah, you do not like it. There are people, and we all know this person. They come into the chamber event or whatever the event is. They pull out their stack of business cards and they start walking around the room handing out cards. And I've watched this dynamic as people will shift away from that person as best they. You do not want to be that person. So it may feel weird to feel like you're pulling back from a potential opportunity because you have expert vision. You, as the expert in your field, can see why they would need you, but they don't. If they don't, they're not ready for you yet. One of the things I teach in my classes is, if they don't think they have the problem, they don't have the problem. You can give them all the information in the world, but if they're not open to it, it won't mean anything.
Yeah.
You're just pestering them. So it's along those lines, right?
Well, and I'd
That's
imagine if
really
you
good
built
point.
that relationship and didn't pester them, if the need does arise or they realize they do have the problem, you're going to be first of mind.
And you are in a very trusted situation. So one of the, I don't know if anybody's taken sales. I've taken a lot of sales training, and some of it's even good, right? But one of the things that always kept coming up, especially in B2B sales, is you want to be the trusted advisor. Okay, well, if you just met somebody, you're not their trusted advisor. They can't trust you. They don't even know who you are yet.
Yeah.
So again, these concepts are good, but they have to be applied appropriately at the appropriate time. Timing in sales is everything, right? And the customer gets to decide when the time is. We don't have the control of the situation like we like to think we do. So sometimes this having some framework like this helps me remember, oh, they're not feeling we're connected, then we're not connected yet. So I will pull back and I will keep in touch. I might send a nice light email that says, hey, it was great seeing you at the breakfast. I hope to see you again next time. Just to remind them that I'm here. I'm not asking them to do anything. I'm not forcing anything down their throat. It's a really light touch, but I'm saying, hey, it was great to see you. I'm not sending them anything that makes them feel weird, right? So you can do that. That's keeping in touch. When you run into them, you go, hi, how you doing, right? Be friendly, but have a light touch. Once they go, hey, wait a minute, didn't you say so-and-so last time we talked? You know, that just came up this week. Oh, really? Well, would you like to get together and talk about it? Would love to. Actually, let's go over in the corner right now and sit down and talk about it. Great, let's do that, right? So those are the opportunities that you can feel comfortable. And as you said earlier, those are the times when you go, yes, this is worth me investing more time in, because there's obviously a two-way conversation going on here. It's not me trying to convince them they need me. It's them going, hey, wait a minute, I think there might be something here. Let's explore that.
It's the long game, right?
Definitely the long game. And the long game isn't always like years. Sometimes the long game is weeks, depending on what your business is and what your average sales cycle is. So this process works, this idea works for any of it.
Well, let's open this up now. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left to some questions. I don't know if we have Amy, Karen, and Crystal on. What questions do you all have? Or is there something specific that you're being challenged with that we can walk through? Anything? You can put it in chat if you don't want to unmute.
I liked the how do I say I'm not interested question. That was actually a really good one, because we all run into that. And it's about time management. Oh, there you go. There's a question.
Yeah, go ahead and ask.
Yes, this is Elena. And thank you so much, Eric and Amanda. This is really great for just getting your great, just valuable in sharing the best information from experiences for so many years and expertise. So my question is, I've been to situations when I even don't want to take a business card because of it's like I would not follow up. I would not follow up because I don't see a connection, as we've just mentioned earlier. So I even don't want to use resources of that particular person giving me his business card. And it means like I'm already lying or not truthful to myself. I'm not going to follow up.
Yeah.
How would you say that? Because I really have been to these situations and
Everybody wants to give you their business card, right?
Like I don't want to take the business card, period.
Well, and just know, and Eric, I want you to definitely answer this in more full. Just know that when someone hands you your business card, you are not obligated or committing in any way to ever follow up with them. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel great, but look, I go to events and I'll come home with 50. They all go in the trash. I'll either follow up with them on LinkedIn. I don't even keep business cards, period. Even if I want to follow up with them, I don't keep them. I usually connect with them on LinkedIn, but I want you to know that it might take some practice, but you're not obligated in any way to follow up when someone hands you their business card. But Eric, how could you
I would echo that. So the first thing I would suggest is there's sort of a little evaluation that you do in a split second that says, okay, is me saying no thank you to the business card going to cause a disruption or cause a distraction to what's going on? Or is it better just to say thank you, don't commit to any communication, take the card and throw it away? Now, and here's why I say that. I completely admire your attitude that you don't want to waste their resources. That is so wonderful. We need more of that
in the world, right?
So much more of that. The reality of it is that the way most people are taught, trained, learn is that they need to go out and get their business card into as many people's hands as possible. And so they are going to do that anyway. So a lot of times you can tell by was there an actual conversation that happened? How did they give you the business card? Right? If it's obvious that they're just giving you the business card because that's the thing they're supposed to do to get you as a contact. All right, well then, don't feel too bad. I hate to say it that way, but don't feel too bad. They're going to give that business card to somebody else. They're already wasting the business card. They factored that into their business model. The other thing to think about is that oftentimes in the United States, the way we end a business conversation is by offering somebody our business card. It's a way of saying, hi, the conversation's over now, and I don't know what to do next.
That's great.
The conversation is obviously over, and I don't know how to get out of the conversation and go talk. People feel weird going, hey, it was great meeting you. There's nothing here, so I'm going to go talk to somebody else. Now that's not all that hard. It's just say, hey, it was great meeting you. I see somebody I want to talk to, and you go over and talk to them. So what people often do is reflexively, they give you the business card because that's what they think they're supposed. That ends the conversation. Mm-hmm. So I hope that helps you not feel too bad about getting the business cards and then going back and like either throwing them away, or if you have a wood stove, they make great kindle to start the wood stove. Since we're going into winter here. It's a tricky situation. I'm really glad you asked that question because it's really awkward. It's very awkward.
Eric, we have a couple more questions and about 2 minutes to answer them. So the first one is, do you think it's more powerful to connect with someone over Zoom or phone? I think seeing someone is more powerful for connections, but how do you do that if you're self-conscious?
Oh, that's a great question. We could do a whole session on that. So the way human beings' brains are wired for visuals. So our brains like having more information is a way to think about it. So you are probably going to have a better conversation sharing nonverbal information if it's video. But if you want to do it on the phone, you also have tone of voice. And so there's a lot more than just the words you're saying. In-person communication is the most information rich. If you are uncomfortable getting on video, the best thing I can say is to practice getting on video as much as you can. Mm-hmm. Find some friends, find some family who is willing to get on the other side of the video call and just do lots of video calls until it kind of takes the edge off. And then hopefully that'll help.
And then the second question is, do you recommend any books or resources to help with selling?
So there are about 5 million books on selling. One book on selling, hang on, I'm looking on my bookshelf here, that recently that I like very much is called The Passion Economy.
I'm going to put that here in the chat.
It's by a gentleman named Adam Davidson. And it's about how not to be a commodity in your industry by focusing on niche markets. It's a really good read. So, and then, yeah, that's probably my pick of the week right now. It's a good foundational book, and it helps you if you're thinking about targeting, especially because I don't think you can go too niche. That's just my feeling, right? You may have multiple niches, but you can't go too niche. So it talks a lot about that.
Do you know if there's still, or anybody on the call really, is there still the Toastmasters groups that are available, or gosh, I used to teach for, the name is escaping me. Oh my gosh.
Other than Toastmasters?
Yeah, we did the, how to influence friends and people.
Oh, the Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie, thank you.
Yeah.
Employed by them. Why couldn't I remember that?
That's all right.
Are there still groups like that? I was thinking about the, being self-conscious. Those are also really good ways to start to practice and kind of flex your conversational muscles. But I don't know how many of those still exist.
Yeah, there is. I know that there's still there's Toastmasters around here for sure.
Okay.
My only feedback on Toastmasters is, you might want to, if there's more than one group in your area, you might want to visit all the groups and find one you click with. Some of them can be a little, I don't know how to say, I don't want to sound like I'm knocking the program, but some people are a little intense about their Toastmasters. Just saying. And it's about speech making. Toastmasters is about speech making, which can be great practice to get up in front of people and to have a structure and all that. It can be a very valuable program. It can also be extremely intimidating and very anxiety producing. So visit the groups. Different groups it's like any networking group.
Yeah.
Like when for chamber networking group, like visit the different groups and see what the personality of the group is.
Awesome. Well, we're at 3:02, so just a little bit over. So we will end here. Heather, if you could put back up our slide with our contact information on it so that people know how to reach us, schedule with an advisor. And if you all have other questions for Eric that we didn't get to ask today, certainly when we put our contact information up here, reach out to us and let us know. We'll get that to Eric and respond back to you. We'll also be posting about this on social media and can answer questions there as well. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today, Eric. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I learned today, which was fantastic. And before you hop off, we have a little poll. If you wouldn't mind doing it, this helps us kind of maintain our training and help us as facilitators know if we're providing the right topics and the right conversations. So please just take, not even a minute to complete that for us. And we hope to see you on some future workshops at the Roanoke Regional SBDC. Follow us on social if you're not already. We do put a lot of stuff out there, Instagram and Facebook. You can find it as RRSBDC. And we hope to see you there. Bye, everyone.